Okay, so well into the deep dive, everybody. Today, we're diving into a topic that's been making waves in the music world really for quite a while now, and that's the career of Drake.
Right.
And you had flagged some material for me that I thought was really interesting because it gets right to the heart of this question that seems to be kind of hanging in the air. Like, is Drake, after all this success, all this record-breaking stuff, is he now maybe actually risking his legacy?
Yeah.
Like, is there a chance that he could, damage his long-term impact? And that's what we're going to break down today, look at
Yeah.
the different sides of it. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a really solid understanding of, like, what's fueling this whole conversation.
Absolutely. And the heart of this deep dive really is this podcast script that you sent me from Cultural Crossfade. It's called The Legecy, How Drake is Risking His Legacy.
Yeah.
And what's so valuable about this is that it really gives us this really structured kind of analysis of his career. And it covers, his rise to fame, but also like some of these recent events that have sparked this debate about his long-term impact.
Yeah, and I think it's really smart the way they start out because they start by reminding us, about the just massive amount of success that Drake has had, like just
Yeah.
undeniable accomplishments. 6 Grammys, 13 #1 albums on Billboard. It feels like every time he drops something, he's breaking another record.
Yeah.
But what's so key is that the cultural crossfade script makes this observation that I think is really crucial to understanding where Drake came from. They call So Far Gone back in 2009 a manifesto. And I think that's so accurate because it wasn't just about charting hits. It was this totally unique blend of vulnerability, like really raw emotion and this huge ambition.
Yeah. And what's fascinating about that early blend is that it wasn't just about music. It really captured this feeling for a whole generation, this feeling of kind of like navigating success and insecurity all at the same time.
Right.
And it kind of set the template for like a whole decade of pop culture. So as they say in the script, like the cultural impact was massive. I mean, it literally made it, as they say, cool to cry in your Cheerios.
Yeah.
And that openness combined with his obvious talent,
Yeah.
really helped him forge a really unique and powerful connection with just a massive audience.
It's easy to forget, too, like just how much he really helped put Toronto on the map as a global rap center.
Right?
Like, that's a huge part of his story. And then on top of all that, he's got this incredible range. Like, the script touches on this, too. He can drop a global dance hall anthem, like One Dance, and then turn around and release this hardcore diss track, like, back to back.
Yeah.
That kind of versatility is pretty rare. And I think that's been a major factor in his ability to stay relevant for so long.
Yeah, for sure.
So, okay, we've got all that incredible success as like the background, but then where does this argument for legacy risk actually start to take shape? Like where does the script start to point out the potential problems?
Well, that's a really important question. And, the cultural crossfade analysis lays out several key areas where concerns have been raised. And the first and maybe the most fundamental is this idea of music quality.
Okay.
The script suggests that there's a growing perception among some listeners that some of his recent work feels kind of rushed. And they specifically point to, honestly, never mind, as this, kind of controversial move into house music that a lot of people were divided on. And then For All the Dogs is seen as having some good moments, but also a lot of what they call skippable filler.
Right. And they do this really good job in the script of contrasting that with, those classic albums like Take Care and Nothing Was the Same, where every track felt so carefully crafted.
Yeah, airtight track lists.
Yeah, and they even include this fan sentiment, this question, like, is Drake bored?
Oh, yeah.
Which I think captures this feeling that some longtime listeners have. Like, has he lost that initial spark? Has he lost that creative drive?
Exactly. And I think when we connect that to this bigger picture, of like an artist's legacy long term, that often comes down to consistently delivering high quality, innovative work, or at least deeply engaging work.
Right.
And if there's this perception of a dip in quality, that can definitely chip away at that legacy over time.
Right. So music quality is one big thing, but then they move on to this area that's really relevant right now. This whole thing about beefs and public perception, and this is where the back and forth with Kendrick Lamar gets really interesting.
Oh, absolutely. And the script does not hold back. They frame Kendrick's euphoria as this incredibly precise and targeted critique.
Yeah.
Almost like a surgical strike that goes right to the heart of these questions about Drake's authenticity and even aspects of his persona. And then they make this argument that Drake's response, all the memes, the AI Tupacers, that it largely backfired The perception was that it came across as unserious.
Hmm.
And as they point out, that's a really bad look for someone who, in the past, had a reputation for ending careers with a single well-aimed online diss.
Yeah, that's so interesting because there was this perception for a long time that Drake kind of had this power, in these online battles.
Right.
And cultural crossfade is suggesting that maybe he's lost some of that control.
That maybe that grip on the narrative has weakened.
And then from there, they go into this concept of overexposure, which I think is so relevant in today's world, where everything is 24/7 digital.
Right.
And it's this argument that by constantly releasing music, being so active on TikTok, Instagram, all that, that he's actually diluting his own brand.
Yeah.
Like, they make this really good point about, remember when a Drake feature on someone else's track was like a huge event?
Oh, yeah.
Versus now it's like, oh, he's on another Sexy Red track,
Yeah, right.
It's almost like this constant visibility is actually lessening the impact of each release or collaboration.
Yeah. I mean, it really ties into this bigger idea of scarcity and demand in our attention economy.
Right.
When an artist is constantly in the public eye, each individual offering can lose some of its speckleness, its impact.
Right. And then from overexposure, cultural crossfade takes us into what they call the soft era backlash. And this gets into some of the changes in Drake's lyrics and themes that have been attracting some criticism.
Right.
This is where we get into those lyrics about dating younger women, and they even bring in that J. Cole line, you, the GOAT, why are you still chasing pups?
Yeah.
And they also talk about how some of his bars are now being perceived as like corny dad jokes, and even the memes making fun of his Toronto accent that seems to have really stuck online.
Mm-hmm.
It all suggests a shift in his persona that maybe isn't resonating with everyone who was a fan from the beginning.
Right, like he might be leaning into this self-parody that maybe appeals to a new, younger audience, but maybe it's alienating those who connected with that earlier, more introspective or even harder-edged Drake.
Right, and that leads right into this point about a generational divide that the script highlights.
Yeah.
And I thought this was one of the most insightful parts of the whole cultural crossfade analysis, this observation that Gen Z might actually like these troll-like aspects of his persona and online presence, while the older fans who were there from the start really miss that depth and emotional resonance. And they include this quote from a Reddit user that I think really sums it up. They say, Drake used to make music for the guy who got his heart broken at 2 a.m. Now he makes music for the guy who's DMing 19-year-olds at 2 a.m.
Wow.
And that, to me, really highlights this perceived shift in who his target audience is and what his music is actually about.
It really speaks to this challenge that any artist with a long career faces. Like, how do you stay relevant to new generations without losing what made your core fan base connect with you in the first place?
Right. And it's important to note here that cultural crossfade doesn't just present this one-sided argument for legacy risk.
Right.
They also spend time exploring the counter-arguments and the potential for Drake to actually recover from all of this.
Absolutely.
And I think that balance is really important to get the full picture. They remind us that legacies aren't set in stone the moment an artist becomes successful. They bring up examples like Jay-Z, who bounced back after an album like Kingdom Come.
Right.
And Nas, who reinvented himself and solidified his legacy after a period where he wasn't getting the best reviews, after Nostradamus.
Yeah.
So the point is that artists have gone through periods of perceived decline and come out even stronger.
And it's all about this idea of artistic evolution, and the ability to adapt. And the script suggests that Drake is still capable of producing greatness. They even point to flashes of the old Drizzy in his project, Her Loss.
Right.
So the talent, the potential is still there. The question is, how does he use it moving forward?
Right. And they offer some interesting ideas for how he could do this kind of reset. They suggest maybe he needs to step away from chasing clout and social media trends, maybe get back to more introspective songwriting with more depth, maybe tap into that fan nostalgia with something like, a Take Care Too.
Right.
They even say that strategically using retirement rumors could build up anticipation for future projects.
Oh, interesting.
So all of these are presented as possible ways for him to regain some of that cultural weight.
Or as they playfully suggest, towards the end, maybe this whole narrative of risk is all part of some elaborate, 4D chess strategy that Drake has going on.
Yeah, like he's playing the long game.
Yeah, this perception of decline could actually be deliberate, like shedding his skin to move into a new phase of his career.
Right.
And, it's a provocative thought that really acknowledges Drake's history as a savvy strategist, in the music industry.
Yeah, for sure. So As we wrap this up, it's clear that cultural crossfade has laid out this really compelling case with arguments on both sides of this legacy risk discussion.
Hmm.
On the one hand, there are valid concerns about a dip in music quality, missteps in public feuds, a feeling of overexposure, and a shift in themes that maybe isn't connecting with all of his longtime fans.
Yeah, but on the other hand, we have to remember his undeniable track record, his history of reinventing himself, and the fact that popular culture is constantly changing.
Right.
All of those factors leave a lot of room for a comeback or a deliberate evolution of his artistry. Maybe even something totally unexpected that changes the whole narrative again.
Right. And that leads us to our final thought for you to consider. Given Drake's ability to really dominate the cultural conversation for so many years, is this whole idea of a risky legacy just an inevitable stage in a much bigger game that he's playing?
Mm.
Maybe the very fact that we're having this discussion, that he's being analyzed and debated on this level, even when some of it is negative, maybe that just reinforces his enduring presence and relevance in our culture.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
And it raises this question for you. In a world where music and celebrity are constantly changing, what really defines a lasting legacy?
Yeah, what does it really take to leave a mark that truly endures?
That's the question we leave you with.
Something to think about.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Yeah, this was a good one.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.